Michael, we usually leave our recommendations until the end of the podcast, but this one can't wait. So many of our friends in the film world have been talking about Conclave, the new film based on the best-selling novel by Robert Harris about one of the world's most secretive ancient rituals, the selection of a new pope. At long last, it's coming out on October 25th.
Written by Peter Strawn, who adapted Wolf Hall for television and also wrote Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy, Conclave was directed by Edward Berger, known for All Quiet on the Western Front. It stars Ralph Fiennes as the cardinal who oversees this process, following the unexpected death of the previous pope. As the leaders of the Catholic Church gather together in the Vatican, the cardinal discovers a trail of secrets that could shake the very foundations of the organization.
It's a gripping story enacted by an all-star cast, including Stanley Tucci, John Lithgow, and Isabella Rossellini. All are magnificent. Critics are calling Conclave hands down the best picture of the year. So please put it on your watch list. Conclave, out only in theaters on October 25th from Focus Features. Get your tickets now at conclavethefilm.com. Happy Saturday. It's October 19th, 2024, and you are listening to Morning Meeting. I'm Ashley Baker in London.
And I'm Michael Haney in New York City.
Okay, this week in the news, we are just 18 days out from the U.S. election, and Trump is becoming more erratic by the second. This week, in a town hall meeting, he referred to himself as, quote, the father of IVF. Rather curious, given that he only recently figured out what it was that had to be explained to him by Katie Britt, an Alabama senator. Okay. Meanwhile, in much happier news, in 2026, astronauts will be doing the first moonwalk since 1972, and they will be doing so in high style. NASA has collaborated with Prada on the white and gray suits, accented with red stripes. I mean, this is the kind of news we live for, Michael. But as usual, Michael, airmail is the antidote to all of that.
Absolutely. First, you may all remember one of the great mysteries from this summer. We're talking about what happened when a $165 million luxury yacht owned by Mike Lynch, Britain's first internet billionaire, sank in 15 minutes during a freak storm off the coast of Sicily, killing Lynch, his brilliant teenage daughter, and 5 others. It was a horrific tragedy, and one which, as Sam Kashner reports, has now set conspiracy tales swirling. Then, our colleague George Pendle will join us to explain a very strange cultural shift. Back in the day, it was pop music stars who were all about scandalous behavior, and politicians were the boring, white bread ones. Now, it's all upside down, with politicians regularly outperforming and outdoing pop stars in the scandal department. How the hell did we get here? George will reveal all. And on the subject of explanations, it's not quite answering the question of why do older men end up with younger women, but it's close. It's about how a 30-year-old woman named Noor Al-Fala has notched relationships with men 50 years older than she is, including Clint Eastwood, Mick Jagger, and Al Pacino, whose baby she recently had. My razor-sharp co-host, Ashley Baker, will explain all. So, Ashley, where would you like to begin today?
Let's talk about the story that captivated any readers of the British press in August, the life and times of Mike Lynch, Britain's first internet billionaire who died on his sunken yacht off the coast of Italy on August 19th. Sam is a writer at large at Airmail, as well as the author of many books, including our personal favorite, Life Isn't Everything, Mike Nichols, as remembered by 150 of his closest friends. Welcome, Sam.
Hello, Ashley, Michael. Thank you.
Sam, your story this week really has it all. It's got a billionaire, tech investor, and entrepreneur, Mike Lynch. It has a sunken yacht. It has a storm. It has an intriguing cast of supporting characters as well. What drew you to this story? I mean, it's been covered so extensively in the British newspapers. When did you first get word of it?
I've sort of followed it backwards in a way. I mean, beginning with the sinking of the Bayesian. I read about Mike Lynch when he was extradited to San Francisco, placed under house arrest, and I had vague knowledge of the sale of his company Autonomy to Hewlett Packard and what a folly that turned into and his sort of undoing. But my interest began with the sinking of the Bayesian in the Mediterranean. It was such a terrible event and such a freakish event. What sailors for 300 years have called a black swan event, something so unanticipated and rare, a waterspout, essentially a tornado that centered around this one area, this one boat that caused this great catastrophe.
So, Sam, take us back to that night. It's August 19th off the coast of Palermo, Italy. This is the thick of summer yachting season in the Mediterranean. Take us there.
Yes. Well, Mike Lynch had gathered 22 people, a crew, as well as some of his closest friends, his wife and one of his daughters, an 18-year-old woman about to enter Oxford. Her name was Hannah. And one of the chief lawyers who had been with him through this 13-year ordeal. And they were celebrating their legal victory after more than a decade on a rather famous yacht, which he had, when it came into his possession, he called the Bayesian, after a famous mathematician, well, not famous then, but who had come up with a mathematical formula, which has sort of, entered the language as Bayes' theorem, which also was the basis for much of Mike Lynch's early tech work. So he was kind of an avatar for Lynch, and he named his boat the Bayesian. Somewhere in the middle of the night, about 4:00 in the morning, this tremendous storm, an event localized in this one area where the boat was anchored, snapped the mast in half. It was the second highest mast on a boat in the world, I think. And the boat began to tilt and to list its side within 13 or 14 minutes. It was at the bottom of the Mediterranean. 7 people perished, I believe, including Lynch's daughter. At the beginning, they were just missing persons. People didn't know what had happened to them. But divers over the next 2 or 3 days began recovering bodies. One was immediately seen, this very likable chef who his body was floating near the wreckage of the Bayesian, and the other bodies were brought up by divers eventually, although Mike Lynch's wife and 15 other people were thankfully rescued. But it was a catastrophe. I mean, the boat was essentially also upside down. The floor had become the ceiling. Escaping was impossible. There was a glass door that had shattered, and Mike Lynch's wife, Angela, to get on deck, cut her legs and feet very badly through all the shattered glass. And, the boat was supposed to be unsinkable, which added to the sort of mystery. So were the hatches opened? No, They discovered later that there really didn't seem to be professional negligence, but they had to open an investigation anyway. It's part of Italian law. It was a nightmare.
And Sam, I mean, this is an incredibly expensive boat. Things like this shouldn't break, right? I mean, this is just one of the many shocking facets of this story, but this accident happened 2 months ago. But what do we know now about why the boat sunk so quickly?
That's an open question. It's one of the things that adds to the mystery of the event itself. I mean, in a way, it was kind of destroyed by a tornado, 175 mile an hour winds of the moment, I mean, for the mast to break. It's possible that there were design flaws in the boat. I'm not sure we'll ever really know what happened unless somehow there are experiments to kind of recreate the events. But it was kind of sui generis, There was a man who was considering buying the boat at one point who rejected it. He felt the boat was not structurally sound. But this boat was built by one of the great yacht makers in Europe. It won all sorts of awards, and it was kind of a magnificent looking thing. But these kind of typhoons at sea I wonder if any boat could survive what occurred to the Bayesian,
So, Sam, obviously a tragedy, and one of the real pieces that you start to get into in part 1 of your story this week is, in addition to the divers rushing to find survivors, which all turned out to be victims, one of the things they really raced to retrieve was personal hard drives of Lynch that he locked in a safe. And this is a guy who, as you reveal in your reporting, he had clients who included MI5, U.S. National Security Agency, the Israeli Secret Service. And, in addition to that, his partner, Stephen Chamberlain, was killed less than a week before. So tell us about these wrinkles of the story.
Yeah, the death of Chamberlain, who was his partner and his co-defendant in this sort of endless Bleak House type trial, and tribulation after the sale of autonomy to Hewlett-Packard. He stuck by Mike Lynch. They were on trial together in San Francisco, as well as in Britain. After the verdict, he was back in Cambridge, I believe, jogging, taking a run, and he was hit by a car. He was taken to hospital, put on life support. 3 days later, he died. The same day Mike Lynch perished. The eerie aspects of this story are really, really haunting. And yes, the hard drives in the safe, the Dark Trace, one of Mike Lynch's companies, did this security work. He was also an advisor to several British prime ministers, David Cameron in particular. And he did work for these governments assessing data, and there was very sensitive information on those hard drives, which also added, especially in the time we're living in, to these rather wild conspiracy theories, which I don't think we should give any credence to. The death of Chamberlain at the same time as Lynch's death, and there are other companies that do work with government agencies and things like this. So it's led to fantastical claims, But of course they were eager to retrieve them because of the sensitive information,
So Sam, we're still trying to make sense of this horrible tragedy 2 months later, but where do things stand now?
The Italian authorities are obligated to conduct what they call, rather ominously, a manslaughter investigation. And they're looking at 3 people involved. The fellow who was on lookout that night, another man, I believe a New Zealander who was in charge of the engine room, and the captain of the boat himself. What is routine for Italian prosecutors is life-changing for the people being investigated. And of course, the other extraordinary thing is that while Mike Lynch lost his civil suit in Britain, no sooner did Angela Beccaris Lynch arrive safely on dry land, Lynch's wife, that Hewlett-Packard is going to pursue suing Lynch and his heirs for their money related to the civil suit. This is sort of ongoing, to say nothing of the very tragedy and loss of life. I was very moved by Hannah Lynch, who was about to enter Oxford, and she was considered one of the most promising English literature scholars, students in Britain. It was a terrible tragedy all around.
Thank you so much for speaking with us and for this incredibly gripping story. We can't wait to read part 2.
Oh, thank you.
So, Michael, it turns out that the bad boys of American culture are no longer the rock stars that we used to watch on VH1's Behind the Music series. It is now, in fact, politicians. It turns out they can get away with murder, and the rest of us are just mere mortals. George Pendle, an editor-at-large at Airmail and our dear colleague, is here to explain his theory. Welcome, George. All right, George, as you posit, politicians are the new rock stars. They can get away with almost anything consequence-free. And somehow the tables have been reversed, and now we're holding rock stars accountable for their bad behavior. What happened, and how did we get here?
Well, week after week, there'd be a new revelation from RFK, that there'd be, a dead bear cub left in Central Park, or there'd be lost demons, or, we'd harken back to his heroin addiction. And, I was trying to come up with anybody in politics who possibly, could be compared to him due to his bad behavior. And there really wasn't anybody. And really the only person I came up with who was in any way similar to him was the former Black Sabbath singer, Ozzy Osbourne, who was renowned for his kind of bacchanalian lifestyle, for always being on drugs, for barely being coherent, and for biting off a bat's head while on stage. And it just seemed to me that there was something encapsulated in RFK, which was that politicians have become these untouchable, poorly behaving individuals. And they've taken on many of the aspects of the traditional rock star. And so I was kind of, thinking about this, and it took me back to earlier in the summer when Charlie XCX, the pop singer who who came up with, the Brat album, which really defined the summer. She tweeted, "Kamala is Brat." And this was a huge sensation. And it really kind of kickstarted Kamala Harris's presidential campaign. But I think there was a deeper truth to it rather than just the veneer of having a pop star talk about a politician. There is something that has changed, and politicians have become really commensurate with what we traditionally think of as the pop and rock stars of pretty much any time up until the 2010s.
George, I'm glad that you've explained this for us because I thought we had just given up on politicians. I didn't really realize that we've simply transferred our energies elsewhere.
One needs only to look at, say, Chapel Rowan, who's this red hot singer who's come out after slogging in the circuit for a couple of years. She's suddenly become this giant pop star this summer. And no sooner has she kind of risen up the charts than she was kind of being confronted with all these pretty much moral questions. Why hadn't she endorsed Kamala Harris? Why was she complaining about her fans being stalkers? When she cancelled a show in Europe, she was accused of being disrespectful. And I just thought this is very strange. These are very strange accusations to be kind of planting on a rock star who are meant to be behaving badly, who aren't meant to get involved in politics, who are meant to do whatever they want. Pop and rock stars were always those individuals out there who you could kind of live vicariously through. You saw Mick Jagger acting badly, in the south of France with models, and Led Zeppelin kind of living this debauched lifestyle in the 70s. And it was this kind of, guilt-free person you could follow and enjoy in their various kind of debaucheries. But now we kind of swap that onto politicians. Now, our politicians are the ones acting badly. I mean, look at Matt Gaetz, for instance. I mean, talk about behaving badly. He's been accused of sex trafficking. And yet, somehow, he's kind of laughed it off and continues to kind of operate as a politician. Or like, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who thinks that Jewish financiers like the Rothschilds have kind of built a space laser to start forest fires in California. This is crazy stuff that we would have normally expected from some drug-addled 1960s hippie pop star with, slight conspiracy background. But no, she's there, a congresswoman, in the House of Congress, passing laws that will affect us on a daily basis. And it wouldn't really matter, except, when pop and rock stars did this, we just kind of laughed it off. It was kind of bad boy behavior, generally. Sometimes bad girl behavior, too. But now it's politicians. These people we're treating as if there's no consequence, but there obviously is. They are running the country for us.
I'm like Dave Rohl, who, as you report in your story, had a baby with a woman who was not his wife. And I mean, I've never seen such contrition. I mean, I can't imagine.
It was appalling. I mean, I said in the piece, Mick Jagger must be shaking his head somewhere because after, having a child, with presumably some groupie somewhere he met, traditional rock star behavior, he wrote this appallingly mawkish, note, which went viral on Twitter, just saying, "I love my wife and children. I'm doing everything I can to regain their trust." And it was exactly the kind of note you would read from a politician in the 1980s who'd been caught in a sex scandal, in the 1990s, or even in the early 2000s. And yet this man, Dave Grohl, the former drummer for Nirvana, the lead singer of the Foo Fighters, one of the leading voices in rock today, was kind of acting like a Republican had been caught kind of, having an assignation with somebody in a toilet in 1993. It was very strange.
It's this blandification, George. And as you sort of you talk about Chris Martin, being interviewed about his diet. And I also think, as you sort of get to like the Taylor Swifts in your story, they're so conscious about their career and they're kind of applauded for their strategic ambition, which used to be there was no plan. It was just you sort of you started a band and you sang and you got rich and you enjoyed being drunk and high.
Well, I think that's right. We now expect our singers to be saints, and our politicians to be sinners. It's a very strange thing. And Taylor Swift in particular is this embodiment of that. She steps so carefully every step of the way in her career, just because I think she kind of knows that this is what people want nowadays. And, notably, it was her endorsement of Kamala Harris that was most closely watched. Nobody cared if a senator or if a congressman or if a governor, gave the backing to Kamala Harris. It was when Taylor Swift endorsed her that we finally knew, yes, this presidential campaign is, off and running.
Well, George, you've really given us a lot to think about now. If Chapel Roan ever resurfaces after all of this drama, I think we should just be prepared. Everyone's going to hold her to account for every little indiscretion.
Well, quite. I mean, it's a bit sad, really, because, when one, wants to seek some kind of carefree debauchery, one usually turns to music. And yet now those guys are all kind of watching their backs and making sure they're not being disreputable in any way.
Maybe the moral here, George, is, if you want to do drugs, have lots of sex, and get into all different types of debauchery, go into politics. People just love you for it.
I mean, if that isn't a cry to stir the civic righteousness in one's heart, I don't know what is.
George, thank you so much. This is a great story. It's incredibly fun to read, not only for George's beautiful writing, but for also all of the ridiculous anecdotes of all of these musicians and politicians. Relish every sentence.
Thanks so much.
We can't wait to get to the theater to see Conclave, a gripping thriller from Academy Award-winning director Edward Berger, starring Ralph Fiennes, Stanley Tucci, John Lithgow, and Isabella Rossellini.
It's all about one of the world's most secretive and ancient traditions, the selection of a new pope.
It's an electrifying story and a magnificent cast, and it's only in theaters on October 25th. Get your tickets now at conclavethefilm.com. Moving on, Michael, where shall we go next?
Well, one place I'd like to go, Ashley, is a fascinating world you've taken us this week in the issue. It's about a woman named Noor Al-Fala. And for those of you listening at home, as I touched on in the introduction, she's a woman who has managed to get relationships with Al Pacino, Clint Eastwood, and Mick Jagger. Who is she? Ashley is going to tell us all about it. Ashley, as you know, is my co-host here at Morning Meeting. Welcome, Ashley. So let's get to it. Who is Noor Al-Fala, and how did she come on your always sterling radar?
I'm really embarrassed that I know so much about Noor Al-Fala, but this is what you get when you read the Daily Mail constantly. So she's 30 years old. She's a film producer. She's from Los Angeles. She's very beautiful. She looks like many people on Instagram that appear to be heavily retouched, but that's just how great they look due to some combination of good genes, skincare, and Lord knows what else. But it's not really her Hollywood prowess that has Hollywood talking. She has had several high-profile relationships, most notoriously with Al Pacino, currently age 84. The two have a baby together named Roman, who was born last year. And it's quite the love story. They're 54 years between them. Her parents are in their late 50s. So that tells you something. This guy's basically the age of a grandparent, potentially. And it's fascinating because it's so contrarian. We're really used to many stories of older men that are juggling younger women, but that's now seeming like a cliche. I mean, Noor is kind of an exemplar of the more modern version of this. She's got all of Hollywood's A-list, at least of a certain age, clamoring to get into her orbit.
Yeah, as you note, she was kind of started this when she was 22 and she attracted Mick Jagger, and she's sort of gone on from there. But, as you also detail in your report, she's a Hollywood producer. She's produced the film The Apprentice. That's the fictional sort of one with Jeremy Strong. It's out right now, the movie that imagines Trump's early life with Roy Cohn. But she also seems, tell us, she seems to have created friendly connections within Hollywood, right?
She seems kind of fun. She clearly has social graces. She's managed to penetrate some pretty tight circles, which is fascinating, but done so without a lot of backlash. This is a woman who, when she was 22 years old, she was going out with Mick Jagger, who was in his 70s at the time. As a result of that Mick Jagger relationship, she's been a known quantity to the tabloids ever since, and they really don't have anything bad to say about her, which is unusual, in these sorts of stories. So it suggests that, at least in some circles, she's very well liked. And she has kind of charming things to say about her relationships with these older men. So I think we just have to rehash her dating history, Michael, I'm sorry to say. But so she dated Jagger. And then after that, it was the billionaire investor, Nicholas Bergroyan, who's the American-German investor and a founder of a political think tank that bears his name. That also ended. But the two have clearly remained friends because they were spotted together at a Sting concert last year. And that's newsworthy, Michael. How many 30-year-olds that we know of appreciate Sting? And she certainly isn't shying away from this press and attention. She's not exactly, proclaiming it by doing a cover story with Us Weekly, which she probably could, given that she has a baby with Al Pacino. But she did a story with Vogue Arabia that was pegged to a film she had coming out at Sundance. And she says kind of charmingly, I was born in the wrong generation. I've been an old soul all my life. I have friends who are 70 years old, et cetera, et cetera. And, on one hand, this could all just be evidence of a global man shortage. She really could have this pronounced attraction to older men, but there's something kind of sweet and charming about her. I don't know. She's just a fascinating character, and one I have a feeling that we're going to be hearing a lot more from. Also, Michael, fun fact, she has most recently been spotted out with Bill Maher, who at 68 is relatively sprightly.
Robbing the cradle.
basically. Ladies, lock up your grandfathers. But she's someone that we can't help but talk about in the airmail verse. She's like a new age Pamela Harriman, although Pamela Harriman was certainly not dating men 54 years older than she was.
So, she drives past an assisted living facility and gets all excited. Ashley, thanks for making us all feel younger today.
I know. It's like being old has never been so attractive.
There's only one place to discover a global snapshot of the current cultural scene. Airmail's Arts Intel Report, our international research tool for what to do and where and when to do it, is user-friendly, continuously updated, and meticulously curated. Arts Intel is handy at home, on the road, and when you're planning your next trip. It also includes indispensable lists of restaurants and hotels in key cities around the world, recommended by our well-traveled experts. Explore Arts Intel at airmail.news/arts-intel, and be sure to sign up for our Week in Culture newsletter, which is published every Wednesday afternoon at airmail.news/WIC. I'm Chris Garrett, an Airmail Deputy Editor, and I never leave home without it. Bon voyage.
Well, on that note, Michael, I know you want to go see this Apprentice Trump movie, which she was an executive producer on. I am very tempted to do that as well, but I know you have something you can recommend to us.
I do. And speaking of older men, Ashley, it stars one of the greats who, at age 82, is in Nora Alfala's sweet spot. But we'll see what happens there. I'm talking about Harrison Ford, and he is back in season 2 of Shrinking, which just dropped its first episode this week. For those of you who haven't seen it, I highly recommend you watch season 1 and then get to this. It's the show that was created by Brett Goldstein, who is one of the minds behind Ted Lasso, and it stars Jason Segel and Harrison Ford as shrinks who share a practice in LA. Segel is a single dad. Ford is a total curmudgeon. There are many other complications that yield a lot of laughs. And that's what the show is. I think it's one of the most enjoyable and smart comedies out there right now. It fills a bit of that Ted Lasso hole you may still have. So Ashley, I know you like it. It's called Shrinking, and it is on Apple TV. And you, my dear, what do you have for us today?
Okay, so Michael, last week you recommended Disclaimer on Apple TV+. Well, I have to say I'm now obsessed with it as well. Thank you very much. I mean, this is a great series.
How great, right?
Yeah, it's directed as a psychological thriller, written and directed by Alfonso Cuarón. It was based on a 2015 novel of the same name. I'm kind of loving it. Anything with Blanchett in it, and Sacha Baron Cohen in this dramatic role is very fun.
And Kevin Kline, who doesn't work enough by his own choice, I'm sure, but it's just to see him. And it's a little uneven in places, but I mean, the quality of the talent and what they're playing and like how it's shot and, it's pretty addictive, right?
It's very addictive. It's even almost as addictive, I think, as La Maison.
Oh, I still haven't looked at La Maison. I have to look at La Maison.
It's right up your alley. Again, very campy, but it's kind of the succession of the fashion conglomerate set. Highly dramatized, of course.
That's all I like is highly dramatized. I'm kidding.
We want to thank you all so much for joining us. We'd like to extend a special thanks to our sponsor, Focus Features. And Michael, will you please read us out?
Good Morning Meeting is produced by Airplay Productions and edited by Jesse Cannon. Our co-editors are Graydon Carter and Alexander Stanley. Our chief operating officer is Bill Keenan. Our deputy editors are Ashley Baker, Chris Garrett, Nathan King, Jill Vitale, and Ash Carter. Our CMO is Emily Davis, and our music supervisor is Randall Poster. The theme music is The Cute Monster by the Buddy Collette Quintet. A new edition of Airmail is published every Saturday, so please subscribe and enjoy all of our stories on airmail.news, which we update every day. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Airmail Weekly. We'll be back here next Saturday with another edition of Morning Meeting. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe at Spotify or Apple Music. But most of all, thank you again for joining us.